And here's his plan and response. He's going to divorce Mary quietly. In the Old Testament, Mary would have been killed, as it was assumed that she was an adulteress because she had become pregnant before being married to Joseph. And so she would have been killed in the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, the kind of more humane option was to pursue divorce. And so Joseph is going to be faithful to the law. He's going to divorce Mary, but he aims to do it quietly. And here's why that's such a big deal. Joseph's family and his relatives were probably encouraging him to pursue a public trial. Because at a public trial, he gets to tell the whole community that's whispering about him and Mary, they are the scuttlebutt of the town. He gets to tell the whole community, it wasn't me. I wasn't involved in this. She's got her own problems, puts Mary on blast and saves himself and kind of pulls himself out of the drama and sets the record straight for the whole community. If you were in Joseph's shoes, you'd want to do that exactly. If you have ever been wrongfully accused of something, or there's been a rumor spreading about you, you would kill for an opportunity to stand up in front of everybody that's been talking about you and say, it's not true and I can prove it. You would love that. But Joseph says, I'm going to do it quietly. I'm not going to pursue a public divorce. I'm going to do what's most faithful to the law and least damaging to Mary. And in doing so, he's going to let the whispers about him continue. Man, you got to appreciate Joseph. I mean, just think about this for a second. He gets the law. Not just the letter of the law, what's written, what he's supposed to do, but he gets the heartbeat of the law. Because he doesn't weaponize the law to his own advantage to blow up Mary, which is, by the way, what the Pharisees were awesome at, what the religious leaders of the day were great at. They would use the law to make others look terrible so you wouldn't look at them. And they would weaponize it to their own advantage. And Joseph has every opportunity to protect himself by blowing up Mary and chooses not to. This is a guy who didn't just get the letter of the law, but the heartbeat of the law as well. And can we just say, you guys, this is a 13 to 18-year-old young man who hears that his fiance is pregnant and doesn't have to go, oh, was it that one time? He knows it wasn't him. He's been faithful. He's been obedient. A lot of us would struggle to even get into his shoes because we have not been obedient like that. We've not been faithful. We've been impure. We've blown other people up to protect ourselves. We couldn't even relate to Joseph. And that's why his story sits so wrong with us. God, that's the guy? That's the guy who gets his life blown up for Christmas? He's been obedient. He's been faithful. He's done all the right things. And you blow up his life for Christmas? Oh, you see, you guys, that actually tips our hat a good amount for what we actually think about obedience. See, if we're not careful, we come to think of obedience as a way in which we get to control God. I do what God wants, and then God gives me the stuff on my list. I do what God wants, and then I will be blessed. Here's the thing, obedience is not a formula. Look first here in your notes. Obey God even when it isn't convenient, because obedience isn't a formula, it's trust. Obedience isn't a formula, it's trust. Here's the thing, how many times have you prayed a prayer exactly like this? God, if you do X, I will do Y. There's the formula, right? I will obey so long as you give me what I want in return. We view obedience as a way to get God in our debt so that we ultimately have some sort of control over him and can control our circumstances and avoid things like pain and suffering and sorrow and loss. If I do the right things, God will give me good stuff in return. That's not what God says. Look at what he says to Job in Job 41:11. Who has a claim against me that I must pay? everything under heaven belongs to me. God says, I do not owe you anything. You will never in your life find yourself in a position where God is in your debt. He does not owe you anything. And here's yet the really beautiful thing. Does obedience often lead to blessing? Yeah. What a gracious gift of God. He doesn't owe you blessing in return for obedience, but often when we obey, we experience blessing along with that. But what happens is sometimes we conflate the two and we begin to think that it's a formula, that if I just keep obeying, things just keep going my way. And that's just simply not how it works. The book that we just quoted from, the book of Job, is like an expose on this whole question. Why do bad things happen to obedient and faithful people? Job is incredibly obedient. He is proactively obedient to God. And yet Job is allowed by God to lose everything. He loses all of his kids. He loses all of his wealth. He loses his standing and status in his community. He loses the health of his own body. He loses everything. And then Job's friends come around and they begin asking questions. Job and his friends are trying to make sense of what's happening to Job. And the heartbeat of his friends' questions is, what'd you do, bud? Like, God doesn't blow up people's lives for funsies, Job. What did you do to earn God blowing up your life? That's their thing. They're looking at the equation. They're looking at the formula. And they're saying, this doesn't just happen to people, Job. God does this because you did something. You failed to obey. Surely you are hiding sin. And Job says, man, I know that God should reward me because I know that I'm obedient, and he hasn't. So maybe God is unjust. And then God shows up on the scene, and he doesn't answer one of their questions. Instead, God asks a question of his own. Fellas, you think I run the cosmos on an algorithm? You have no idea how complicated it is to run the entire cosmos. You think I'm using a formula? You think it's just a cosmic karma formula that good for good and bad for bad? You think that's how I'm doing it? A.W. Tozer says we have a bad habit of reducing God to manageable terms. Manageable terms meaning something I can understand, something that acts and operates like me. So if you were in charge of the cosmos, absolutely you'd use a formula. Because how can you possibly be everywhere at once? How can you possibly respond to all the different things happening in the world? You would govern using a formula, but not God. He is all powerful, all knowing, and all present, which means he is able to uniquely respond to every single person and every single situation that comes their way throughout all of human history, and is able to get into the nuance of every single situation, and his wisdom is infinite. So he does not govern using a formula, he governs through his divine and infinite wisdom, which sometimes looks like blowing your life up for Christmas, which sometimes looks like a gift you would want nothing to do with. Obedience is not a formula. We do not obey to get a set of good responses back from God. We obey because we trust him. We trust that God sees more than we do. We trust that he knows more than we do. And we trust that he is good at his job. That's why we obey.